Yo, so guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to TierZoo, and the video is the snake tier list. I've done one reaction to this channel before. Interesting. I mean, I've not really done videos. I've not really reacted to videos similar to this channel, and so it is very unique in that sort of sense. But yeah, it's been quite a long time since I've done that video. It went down quite well from what I remember, and I enjoyed it. And I mean, I think, yeah, it was spiders. So I mean, snakes I think are another level. I mean, spiders probably. What scares me more, a spider or a snake? I don't even know. But yeah, we're just gonna get into. Sorry for the long wait for the reactions. If you didn't see my previous one that I just posted, I've got COVID currently, so I was really ill a few days back. A bit better now, but I'm still pretty sick. But I want to get the reactions back, especially for the upcoming new year. Just want to get back into the rhythm of things. I was sick I was gonna say ages ago. I was sick at the start of December as well for like 10 days. So I've been sick twice, so I've not been lucky, man, but yeah, it is what it is. Hopefully I'm just not going to get sick for a long time now, but let's just jump into this. Links are in the description to my Instagram and my Twitter for those who want to follow me, but let's just get into this. Holy shit! Snakes don't give a damn, man, they really don't.
Snakes are one of the most feared classes in the game, with a number of powerful builds and a vast array of uniquely
What, did you see it scrape its skin off?
in the game, with a number of powerful
Yo, that is a crazy ass shot. What?
builds and a vast array of uniquely lethal abilities.
Ugh.
However, some of these strategies have clearly been more successful than others. So in this video, which was sponsored by CuriosityStream, we'll be going over the snake tier list to see which builds rank highest. But before we get into looking at specific snake builds, let's do an overview of the basic attributes and special abilities the snake faction has access to, as well as a quick rundown of the history of the snake faction. So, snakes are one of the newer factions in the game, joining the game's roster during the latter part of the Mesozoic expansion. They began as a niche offshoot of the lizard faction that was specifically adapted to burrowing gameplay. And in order to best min-max for the most efficient burrowing, this player base eventually opted to completely drop the legs attribute. This ended up being a far more successful gambit than anyone could have anticipated, as it not only granted these lizards better burrowing ability, but also opened up a bunch of other strategies to them. While the snake build first hit the scene during a metagame dominated by dinosaurs, they didn't become a huge threat in the meta until after the main dinosaur powerhouses were banned in the KT balance patch. During this chaotic post-banwave meta, snake players experimented with some crazy builds, including the giant Titanoboa build. But while Titanoboa's giant size granted it short-term success, I think the strategies that the snake player base went on to specialize in are even more effective.
Man.
Fast forward to today's meta, and snakes
days.
are one of the most successful predator factions in the game, owing this success to a handful of powerful, unique abilities. The most obvious of these is slithering.
Bro, it's crazy.
Mobility
Like,
option.
no matter how small they are, they'll just attack you, man. I mean, obviously this is a quite a small creature too, but this is a tiny little snake. It just doesn't care, man.
Abilities. The most obvious of
They'll
these
attack
is slithering,
anything.
the snake's unique mobility option that it gained in exchange for losing its legs. At first glance, this might seem extremely limiting, as snakes cannot jump and move more slowly than they would if they could run. And while
You're
those
done for,
are
mate.
significant limitations, the ability to slither does open up a lot of other options to snake mains. Rather than jumping over barriers,
A dragonfly?
snakes can oftentimes find a way to slither through them. This gives snakes access to a lot of areas of the map that are
Just gonna
normally
eat it.
much more difficult to access, and means things like dens, nests, and other player-constructed bases are often less effective at keeping snake players out.
Oh, come on,
Which makes them one of the
man.
best classes at spawn killing.
You sick
Slithering
bastard.
also allows a comparatively large build to remain very close to the ground and benefit from the stealth bonus of even the shortest grass and foliage. Despite not having claws, snakes make for highly effective climbers, making it very difficult to ever truly get out of reach of a snake. Still, as a rushdown option, slithering tends to be too slow to reliably catch up to other players. So while snakes may not have the ability to chase you down, they've spec'd their movement kit to ensure that nowhere is ever truly safe from them, and if you let your guard down, they'll be poised to capitalize on that. A snake's
Oh, right in
basic
the
strike
neck.
is a little on the weak side for such a dangerous predator. Their bites can't deal that much damage on their own and are easily blocked by armor. It's for this reason that snakes tend to spec into various venom effects to infuse their bites with. Snake venom can have a variety of status effects, which we'll get into more as we progress through the tier list, but in general, venom greatly increases the damage potential a snake can deal with its bite. Without this, many snakes would have no means of defense and would be completely helpless when caught out in the open. Instead, snakes are one of the most feared classes in the game. But which snakes should be feared the most? For that, let's get into the tier list. So, the lower tiers on this list contain members of the snake faction known as colubrids. This is the largest group of snakes and contains almost every snake build in the game, except for the ones you're actually afraid of. Starting at the very bottom of this group, we have the garter snake, one of the weakest snake builds in the game. Data miners are actually unsure whether or not this build is venomous, but if it is, it's some of the weakest venom in the game. And with no other offensive abilities, the garter snake essentially only has favorable matchups against things far smaller than it, like frogs and mice. Because they're so vulnerable, garter snake players...
Was that a worm? Was it being killed by a worm? Wait.
Far smaller than it, like the garter snake essentially only has favorable matchups against things far smaller than it, like frogs and mice. Because they're so vulnerable, garter snake players love to attack aquatic targets like tadpoles and small fish. But they have no actual abilities that synergize with this playstyle, nor is it a particularly good swimmer, and therefore takes on considerable risk when they venture into the water. Garter snakes are also caught in an endless loop of wasting a ton of evolution points, evolving extreme toxin resistance to the poison of a specific newt build. This isn't very efficient, but I guess the garter snake needs to preserve its few favorable matchups. Next in F tier we have the racer snake. This is a snake build that put an above average number of evolution points into mobility, making it one of the fastest snake builds in the game. That's not really saying a lot given that snakes tend to have pretty poor movement speed, but credit where credit is due, this does give them a much better chance of dashing into cover when under attack. Unfortunately, as with a lot of mobility-centric builds, this alone isn't enough to make them competitively viable. In fact, even with their above-average slithering speed, they're usually still too slow to chase down many of their preferred attack targets. They're also worse climbers than most snakes, making them one of the few snakes that can be countered by simply climbing out of reach. In almost all cases, a snake's worst matchup is against birds, and unfortunately for the racer snake, speed usually isn't much use against a surprise aerial attack. Their lack of practical applications for their signature abilities plants them firmly in F tier for me.
Vine snake.
Next on the tier list we have the vine
snake.
Snake.
What the hell?
Now, there are many highly effective arboreal snake builds, and all things considered, the vine snake isn't terrible. It's got great stealth and is an excellent climber. But I mean, just look at this thing. With the lowest HP and defensive stats of any snake, this build folds to absolutely any attack. Vine snakes entrust their survival to their above average stealth stat, but if that fails and the vine snake is discovered, they resort to intimidation. Their intimidation tactic consists of sticking out their brightly colored tongue as a warning. Much like with the blue-tongued skink, I don't consider this to be a particularly effective defensive display, especially when this warning is backed by some of the weakest venom in the snake faction. Definitely not F tier due to its decent camouflage, but with nothing else going for it, it's stuck in D tier. Next in D tier we have the tiger keelback. This snake build breaks the mold when it comes to toxic strategies in snakes, as rather than dumping all of its evolution points into venom, the keelback also allocates some of its resources
Bro, look at the colors though! What the f-
into becoming poisonous, meaning that they can inflict the toxic status effect both when dealing damage and when taking damage. This extra defensive ability definitely raises the keelback's ranking compared to most colubrid snakes. However, overall it's still not that great. Both their venom and their poison aren't all that potent, and it's possible that going all in on one of these strategies might have been the better play in the long run. Still, the keelback strategy does mitigate one of the colubrid faction's main weaknesses though, which is that they have a hard time using their venom defensively. Many colubrids, including the vine snake and keelback, are venomous. This is useful because, I mean, how else would a snake barely thicker than a piece of spaghetti deal any damage, right? The problem is, colubrids lack the efficient venom delivery abilities found in the more dangerous snake builds. Their fangs are located at the back of their mouths, and these fangs don't actually inject venom. The venom is just kind of part of their saliva, so to deal any damage with it, they need to really chew on their target for a good chunk of time. As you might expect, this makes individual strikes from most venomous colubrids quite harmless, as they don't contain much venom per hit, and they also can't really use their fangs unless they get a really solid bite in. So the keelback's poison does sort of cover for this weakness, which is great, and for that it gets to the top of D tier. However, a defensive poison is by no means the only way to mitigate the drawbacks of having rear fangs, as we'll see as we move out of the low tier and into mid tier.
Boom
At the
slang.
bottom
Never
of
heard of
C
any
tier
of
we
these.
have the Boomslang, the most venomous snake build from the Colibrid faction. This snake kinda just does everything the vine snake does, but better. It's an excellent climber and has great camouflage, but also packs a devastating bite with extremely overpowered venom for its tier in terms of potency.
Someone's holding
And while
like
it does
so
have rear
cheese.
fangs, they're significantly larger than most colibrids. But its best adaptation is that the Boomslang can open its mouth far wider than most snakes, allowing it to deliver a venom-infused bite in spite of the unfavorable location of its fangs. This allows the Boomslang to go
Is that a
toe-to-toe with
chameleon?
high-tier builds like the Chameleon, as well as let it use its potent venom as a defensive threat rather than solely just a hunting tool.
Bro, I've never seen a chameleon trying to fight back. Look how weird it
Its
is.
potent venom as a defensive threat rather than
Go on,
solely just a
go
hunting
on.
tool. Now,
Ah.
obviously, this is still far from ideal. Its venom is quite slow acting, making it not that useful when under attack. In my
Yeah.
opinion, the Boomslang is the perfect example of a snake that really just needs 1 or 2 more buffs to be a high tier build, but in its current state,
Next
it
update.
just doesn't quite get there. At the top of C tier, we have our last member of the Colibrid faction, the King Snake. The King Snake is a large snake build with no venom-based abilities. Instead,
Ooh.
this is the first constrictor build on our list. Constriction is a type of grappling attack that, when properly executed, results in a guaranteed KO, even on extremely large targets. Its main drawback is that this attack strategy is highly vulnerable to disruption. A constrictor player has to be able to
Is this another snake? Bro, I don't know what you're doing right now, but this snake looks a lot bigger than you. You might want to back up a little bit.
survive all counterattacks from its target while attempting to restrain it. So with that said, you'd think it'd be very difficult to use this technique against a venomous snake, right?
What are you doing?
Snakes are so flexible that it's very difficult to grapple them without giving them an easy opportunity to
I've never
bite
seen
back.
snakes fighting.
That's where the King Snake's second ability, Venom Resistance, comes in. The ability to ignore all damage from a snake's venom makes the King Snake's matchup against other snakes horribly one-sided. Just for good measure, King Snakes have high enough accuracy on their attacks that they tend to go for the head, which negates a
Holy
snake's
shit!
have high enough accuracy on their attacks that they tend to go for the head, which negates a snake's counterattack potential even further.
What?
This
Imagine the other snake's just eating it from the inside. Like, what the fuck?
is about where the King Snake's supremacy ends though, as the rest of its matchups are pretty standard for a snake, and with no venom of its own, it doesn't pose much of a threat to players it can't reliably immobilize in its coils. Luckily, there's a pretty simple change a constrictor build can make in order to increase the effectiveness of its constriction: size. Boas
B
and
tier.
pythons are the
Okay.
poster children for this type of strategy,
big
being the
boys.
only snake builds that can be properly classified as tanks. While technically these are two different factions, they are functionally extremely similar and both contain specific examples of highly effective tanky snakes. Although boas and pythons have no venom, their large teeth and incredibly high physical stats make them more than a match for just about any player that challenges them directly. With their thick scales and huge size, it's very difficult to defeat one of these in a 1v1 quickly. Their ability to tank a lot of hits during a fight means that even extremely powerful builds like the Tiger are in for quite an uphill battle if they choose to stand and fight.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Well-stated build.
What the hell? That is some crazy footage, man.
Quickly. Their ability to tank a lot of hits during a fight means
First, look at the size of this
that
snake.
even extremely
Oh,
powerful
shit.
builds like the Tiger are in for quite an uphill battle if they choose to stand and fight. Well-statted builds with high defense and DPS, like the Crocodilian factions, are easily overcome with
What the fuck? Why can't I ever find this sort of footage? I mean, this is not a snake, man. This is a. I mean, it is, but like, what? Why is it so thick? What? It's literally thicker than the flipping alligator.
brute strength, once a boa or python uses their piercing fangs and powerful coils to
Flippin'
trap them in an
heck.
infinite grab combo.
See,
Drawbacks
and
to the
flippin'
construction
croc.
strategy are vulnerability to third-party attacks and the immense cost of failed kills.
Yoink.
While many constrictors have the size required to challenge other large builds, going after too powerful a target can expend a disproportionate amount of HP compared to other snakes. As large builds are often more conspicuous, the most successful constrictor
That's a
players
weird-ass looking
will make
snake.
good use of the camouflage ability.
Look at its head.
Out of the boa faction, the most powerful build is without a doubt the anaconda. These are among the heaviest of any snake and by far the tankiest, with an HP stat that renders most physical attacks almost negligible. While anacondas are significantly less viable on land due to their greatly reduced speed on terrestrial maps, their mobility, stealth, and camouflage bonuses in the aquatic meta
Bro, they
make
swim.
them nearly unbeatable
Do they
in
eat
that biome.
fish?
Anacondas are capable of serious speed when their buoyancy abilities can counteract the limitations of their enormous size, making nearly any unsuspecting player who enters the water an easy target. Their eyes and noses are oriented towards the top of their faces, allowing them to expend minimal energy while camouflaged in aquatic vegetation, waiting for the perfect opportunity to carry out an ambush attack. Despite their formidable base stats and proficiency in highly specialized forms of gameplay, the fact that anacondas are only truly viable in aquatic environments limits their utility and places them squarely in B tier. The most competitive build in the Python faction is the Burmese Python. While many snake builds are competitively viable only on certain maps that suit their specialized abilities, Burmese Pythons fit into more of a jack-of-all-trades playstyle and have sufficient mobility in aquatic, terrestrial, and arboreal biomes, in spite of their large size. Burmese Pythons are therefore excellent generalist builds, and as seen with many other generalists, they have been causing serious disruption in servers that they weren't meant to be spawning in. Burmese Pythons have totally destabilized the meta of the Florida Everglades, due mostly to the Python's extremely one-sided matchup against non-social mammal builds, and a lack of the type of builds that normally keep the Python player base in check. Now, thankfully, the current top tier of the Everglades is quite capable of defeating or repelling a Python in single combat, but because the alligator's dominance is restricted to the aquatic zones, Pythons essentially have complete control of the arboreal zone, which has led to a drastic reduction in players running mammal builds like the rabbit, raccoon, fox, and bobcat. While Burmese Pythons come in at the top of B tier due to their versatility, their low speed stat and lack of venom.
Rattlesnake is going to have to be up here. That's all I can think of when I'm thinking about it. I don't know what other things are going to be up there.
Higher tier snakes much more viable choices for most gameplay styles. While some snake builds in lower tiers can use the venom skill, placement in A tier or higher rides almost exclusively on choosing to dump a majority of evolution points into maximizing venom efficiency and delivery methods. Members of the Viper class dominate the A tier. Among the most feared builds in the game, Vipers have a variety of special offensive and sensory skills that help compensate for their generally low defense stats. Their long, hollow fangs are placed at the front of their mouths and can pierce most armor to deliver lethal doses of venom. But one drawback to the flesh-destroying hemotoxins used by most builds in this group is that they can take a while to immobilize players. Most Viper builds also spec into the infrared heat sensing ability, making them extremely powerful nocturnal ambush attackers and compensating for their lack of speed. Some members of the Viper faction tack on tail adaptations too, for access to the intimidation and luring abilities, but these perks are minor compared to their raw offensive potential. Coming in at the bottom of A tier are Gaboon Vipers, combining the highest defense stat of any venomous build with near unbeatable stealth and an incredibly high strike speed. Despite their bulky appearance, Gaboon Vipers are almost invisible to spot during gameplay, and are notorious for destroying unsuspecting players due to the sheer volume of venom delivered during an attack, despite their relatively underpowered toxicity compared to other Vipers. With the longest fangs of any Viper, they can deal significant physical piercing damage, in addition to any toxic effects caused by the venom. They conserve energy by remaining motionless when not in combat, and are rather difficult to provoke into unnecessary confrontation. While Gaboon Vipers are an excellent choice for ambush-based play in jungle maps, their lack of versatility and low aggression means they can be easily outmaneuvered by other builds. Cottonmouths rank slightly higher in A tier due to their rare ability to use the skill set of the Viper class effectively in the aquatic realm. As the only Viper build in the game with aquatic adaptations, their potent venom and fishhook-shaped fangs make them incredibly effective at farming out fish and frog players for easy XP. This build specs into the caudal luring ability at lower levels, allowing them to quickly become competitive, and shed this ability at higher levels in favor of better camouflage. Cottonmouths are also relatively tanky and escape many combat situations by using intimidation tactics. Their dominance in aquatic maps makes them able to occasionally overcome more competitive generalist builds, but this is limited by biome and therefore not useful during the majority of gameplay. Rounding out A tier is the rattlesnake. Best suited for desert and forest biomes, these snakes combine a variety of overpowered special abilities with well-allocated base stats. Rattlesnakes are highly capable builds for ambush-based stealth play due to their ability to create thermal maps of other players in low visibility situations, which makes them one of the most effective counters for mammal players with the night vision ability. Instead of risking health by grappling with other players, rattlesnakes deliver a lethal amount of venom in one quick strike, and then use their prey tracking ability to find them after they've succumbed to toxic status
Holy
effects.
shit.
One major advantage for rattlesnake players is the highly effective rattle intimidation technique, which allows them to scare off more powerful challengers without wasting venom or risking serious damage. While rattlesnakes sit at the top of A tier due to their relatively well-rounded stats among members of the Viper class, all Viper builds are still classified as glass cannons and tend to lose out against opponents with quicker acting venom, superior speed, or high enough HP to tank their attacks. Snake builds placing in S tier overcome the weaknesses of other venom users by maxing out mobility stats and employing a variety of highly effective venom delivery techniques. The most competitively viable snakes spec into heavily neurotoxic venom, granting them the ability to inflict toxic damage and status effects far more quickly than lower tier venom users. While these buffs come at the cost of base defense, S tier snakes are only really weak to the rare few players with venom resistance or effective bite evasion skills.
What? This is Rat Kid and this Cobra!
While these buffs come at the cost of base defense, S tier
or
snakes
Meerkat,
are
whatever
only
it
really
is.
weak to the rare few players with venom resistance or effective bite evasion skills.
That's a badass
Coming up first in
rodent,
S tier is
whatever
the
it is.
Cobra build. With impressive base speed,
Meerkat.
these snakes can actively chase down other players rather than having to solely rely on an ambush strategy. Variants of the Cobra build can spec into moderate aquatic and climbing proficiency, allowing for particularly well-rounded gameplay. Their fast-acting venom is mostly neurotoxic, but can have mixed toxic effects that melt through flesh and maximize the amount of pain inflicted. Even elephant players, the tankiest terrestrial build in the entire game, can be taken down by the ridiculous amount of sheer toxic damage inflicted by a well-placed bite. While all Cobra builds have forward-placed fangs to maximize venom delivery, Spitting Cobra players can use the only ranged attack in the entire snake class by spraying venom up to 2 meters through holes at the front of their fangs. This move has high accuracy and can permanently blind other players when used effectively. Cobra builds advertise their power by using a unique hood modification, intimidating the vast majority of players away from trying to challenge them in the first place. With enough offensive capabilities to take on an entire team of attackers at once, it's no question that Cobras are one of the most competitively viable builds in the Snake faction. Next in S tier are Sea Snakes.
What?
With full
Sea
aquatic
snakes?
adaptations and special underwater sensory skills, these builds can access hard-to-reach areas to demolish even the most competitive fish players. Their fangs are relatively small compared to the closely related Cobra builds, but this works in conjunction with a special attack style. Their venom is some of the deadliest in the game, but causes almost no pain, meaning that other players may not even know they've been hit before fatal toxic damage sets in. While they are effective at using trickster tactics to take down enemies independently, Sea Snake players can also hunt in teams to capitalize on their own offensive potential and compensate for their low individual HP. This build does have a bit of a high skill floor though, and inexperienced players may struggle at playing around the Sea Snake's defensive weaknesses. The Sea Snake build has a unique playstyle that can be hard to master, but with the ability to 1v1 eels and win, this build sits at the top for those who enjoy a challenge.
Black
The final
Mamba.
build on this tier list is the Black Mamba,
Here we go, man.
with incredibly overpowered base stats for their class, including ridiculous damage and speed. The Black
HP's
Mamba is
low,
by
though.
far the most competitive snake, both in terrestrial and arboreal combat situations. Their speed isn't just with respect to movement. The lethal venom of the Black Mamba takes effect extremely quickly, and can decimate enemies of any size due to the high dose delivered in each bite.
You're about to
Black
fool, man.
Mamba venom imposes a variety of neurological status effects, including respiratory failure and vision loss, making them one of the most feared opponents in direct combat.
You just run into your death.
Mamba builds have an extremely aggressive and fast-paced playstyle that leaves little room for counterplay, especially considering that their HP and defense stats are among the highest of any venom users due to their large size. While they don't have any unique moves to speak of, Black Mambas dominate by using strategies common among snake players, and do so to an exceptionally effective degree. Topping the charts with the highest DPS potential of any snake, and respectable defensive skills to boot, the Black Mamba
Is this a dead or is this alive? Because if this is alive, this is one ballsy ass
is the
snake.
undisputed ruler of snake builds. Snakes are by no means meta-defining, but it's
Maybe it
still
killed
worth
it.
knowing how they stack up against each other and what their main strengths and weaknesses are. There's a lot more to snakes than just their general combat abilities though. How do snakes deal with cold damage? How can snakes climb trees so easily without claws or cling pads? If you're really interested in knowing all the ins and outs of the snake build, I highly recommend checking out this video's sponsor.
Jeez, man. I mean, obviously, shout out to his sponsor, getting his money, getting his bread as he deserves, because this is a crazy video once again. Surprising. I'm gonna read some comments now. Surprising, there are snakes in low tiers. They always talk about how they're in the S tier. Ah, funny. I am still terrified of Rinkhouse. Thanks, TierZoo. It's said that the most OP snake was the highest ranking rattlesnake player, the legendary rattlesnake Jake. He modified his damage and intimidation to the max by swapping out his rattle with a Gatling gun, and instead opting for a hood like Cobra's, he switched out for a stylish cowboy hat. 10 out of 10 aesthetics. The lack of Australian snakes in this list means they must be god tier. Yeah, what that was a voice crack. Australian snakes. I was just gonna sneak because Australia is crazy for all kinds of animals, but have I heard of any of these? I don't think I have. Ten most dangerous snakes in Australia. Eastern brown snake. Fair enough. Oh, I don't want to go through that. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this reaction again. TierZoo is a channel that I'm definitely down to do more videos reacting to if people would like that. But I mean, yeah, I don't know what people would like next. Maybe the bird one, the crocodilians one. How many crocodiles are there? Or crocodilian things in the crocodilian species or whatever. The dinosaur tier list, yeah, just suggest what you'd want to see if you do want more of these. But yeah, until next time, like, subscribe, peace.